All right. What's up, everybody that's watching? You are live on the Zach and Matt Show. We have a very special guest today, Jonathan Herzog, who is running in the 10th Congressional District of New York to be a primary challenger against current incumbent Jerry Nadler. Jonathan, thanks for coming on the show.
Thank you for having me. So exciting to be here. I love you guys. I love the work you do. Whenever you post some new gang content, it's always the first click to go to.
Heck yeah. So I want to ask, so you used to be, for those who don't know, you worked on the beginning of Andrew Yang's 2020 campaign, right?
That's right. Yeah. So back in the day when there were 5 people on the team, we had no press, no money, no polls, no no offices. Basically, Andrew asked me to move out to Iowa and basically build and lead and kind of kick things off back in 2018.
Okay. How did that first happen? Like, how'd you get involved with Andrew's inner team? Because I think that's really interesting to have started so early.
Totally. So I guess my arc began when the New York Times piece came out, the infamous "Longer Than Long Shot," the robots are coming, and I had loosely followed some of Andrew's work with Venture for America. And that piece kind of put the pieces of the puzzle together. And I read the New York Times article and said, "This guy's our next president. Got to do all I can to make it happen." Everyone thought I was crazy. But yeah, so basically, I was a student at Harvard Law School and just kind of organized and volunteered and put together a pretty sizable event on the future of Asian American leadership. And we convinced Andrew to come. And, this was back in the days of the campaign talking to like 1 or 2 or like 5 people when they would go out on the stump. And it was then after that that he was like, "All right, John, like, will you move out to Iowa?" And my initial response was kind of, "Fuck no!" Like I, like the gay Jew from New York at Harvard Law School, like is probably not the best way to kick off Iowa. But push came to shove in that weekend, and it was basically the same question that he asked when he got in the race in the first place, which was, someone else has to do this, right? Like someone else is going to run on UBI in his case. And then Andy Stern is like, "Nope, it's only you, man." So I think all of us in our own way have realized that, like, if we don't fill the void, fill the gap, then it's just not going to happen otherwise.
Wow. So at what point, I know you started running pretty early, because I remember seeing you and a few others like Ellers and David Kim back in the fall that were running on this Andrew Yang Humanity First platform. And so when did you switch from being a part of the campaign versus launching your own campaign and almost being inspired by Andrew's ideas?
Yeah, so basically the goal from the outset was, to come in as an outsider and build and hire locally, right? So we kind of came in, starting at ground zero. And I mean, there's really sort of gritty, scrappy grassroots kind of how we built from there. But that was the goal, right? To kick things off, to build the team, set the foundation, go from union hall to church to school. And in the early days, literally, it was like, I would drive 3 hours. You go to an event. It's Amy Klobuchar, it's Marianne Williamson. It's the entire posse of like 26 people, Eric Swalwell included. And then I would show up, like make the pitch, collect the, people's sign up information, hand out swag, and then do it again in a new town. But the goal was to kind of build the relationships and hire people locally. Because, people trust who their neighbors are and people from the region. So basically, like midpoint of last year of 2019, we already had the foundation. We had the core. He was on Rogan. He finally made the debate stage. He entered the mainstream, which was just amazing. And the kind of idea of the tribe of reason and the revolution of reason, seeing that come to life was just like incredible. but also the most common question I would hear, like so many people would hear, was like, okay, great, I love it, love the guy, love the idea. How do you get this through Congress? How do you get this
Yep.
through Congress? And again, like the natural inclination is to be like, all right, well, they'll see our reason, they'll come to our side once we make the case. Um, but then push came to shove, and I realized that no one was going to do it unless a wave of Freedom Democrats and Yang Gang ran in districts across the country and gave an incentive to people, to incumbents, multi-decade incumbents, to actually fight for this themselves or be replaced in the seats of Congress. So it was like middle to late of last year, when I launched, and the primary goal being like helping to instigate a wave of people realizing that Yang Gang, like, we should be running all across the country, running the board, putting up
Yeah.
wins.
Yeah, and it seems like the list of UBI caucus candidates is growing every single day. I saw someone just took the pledge yesterday. So, as someone who's such an early supporter of universal basic income, what do you make of the current news today? Like Mitt Romney coming out for UBI, pretty much. Adam Schiff just tweeted about it. Ilhan Omar. It seems like everything that we as the Yang Gang have been working for, and as you referenced earlier, you get called crazy going to Iowa to support this
Totally
random Asian
gaslit,
guy.
yeah.
And what do you, from your perspective, someone who is one of these people that has been inspired from the grassroots to go and challenge decades-long incumbent, what do you make of the news with the recent UBIs going mainstream? It seems it could be
Yeah,
law.
I mean, I think on the whole, this is awesome. And like in true, Andrew Yang spirit, it's not about us. It's not about our, political careers. It's about these ideas, these policies getting passed, right? And like if Ilhan Omar and AOC and Mitt Romney and Adam Schiff are gonna agree on this, then fantastic. Like I don't
Yeah,
care who passes it. Like let's get it done. Let's get it done now. And you're right. I mean, this crisis, unfortunately, historically, it requires a crisis of this scale and scope to trigger any real
to wake
structural
people up.
change.
Yeah,
Yeah. And I hope that just grows and grows. And it seems like they're catching on. It kind of came knocking on their door, and they had to, but it's got to be even faster.
yeah. It's like everyone's saying every single day matters in this crisis.
Yep.
I know for some of those who aren't as familiar with you, if you go on Jonathan's website, it's Herzog, Herzog 2020.com. He has pretty much like the entirety of Andrew Yang's platform is your platform. Like all the stuff that I think we should be looking for from candidates in the future, like specifically stuff like you have a data bill of rights on there. I think that's very important because I mean, as Andrew always pointed out with his campaign, is oil data is the new oil. So, is there any like specific areas that maybe you do disagree with Andrew on? That's something that just going through your website here, someone might not notice unless they really dive through.
Totally. I think one area, and it's not so much a disagreement as maybe like diving further, is like digital asset market and crypto regulation. So in the 10th district, which is the west side of Manhattan and South Brooklyn, it's literally the world's financial capital. So like all the
Yeah,
investment banks you can think of, the entire wheel, the grinding wheels of capital are like centered in this district. And it's wild because at the same time, like 1 in 6 people live in poverty. So the extreme winner
yeah,
take all is just right there in like as clear a picture as can be seen. But so I think leaning into and diving deeper on like cryptocurrency legislation and expanding on the Wyoming model, which Andrew certainly talked about, and he like engaged with the community and became the crypto candidate, which is awesome. But I think there's especially an opportunity as it relates to data privacy and the data bill of rights and just decentralization on the blockchain. I think we can flesh that out more. And one of the things I'll be doing over the coming weeks, now that we're on the ballot, is actually writing and drafting these bills, right? So we have the blueprint and we have the vision and the policies, but I'm going to actually sit down and like write the Freedom Dividend Act and write this Data Bill of Rights and write this like crypto digital asset legislation, because it just has to be on a page, right, for it to be scaled and passed. I think one other area, Andrew is so perceptive and so ahead of the curve on most issues. And I think on education, the emphasis on expanding like technical and vocational is important, but I also like don't want us to lose sight of just transformative education in its own right. And that doesn't have to come in the form of college. And I think he's so right to de-emphasize and destigmatize not going to college. But I think even leaning and digging deeper into high school curricula, being more focused on like developing the full person, both as a citizen and as a self. And I think he laid out such amazing policies on like introducing mindfulness and financial and digital literacy. But even just talking more about that, just conveying that we're creating new whole people that have to be so resilient in this crazy time. But yeah, I mean, as you said, fundamentally and unabashedly, like my website literally links to his website. Yeah. The goal was just to say like Yang Yang goes to Congress, our humanity first agenda goes to Congress and gets passed.
Yeah. I mean, it's perfectly fine to have disagreements. In fact, like you don't want someone, at least me personally, like who's a yes man, like
right.
It should always be about like the ideas and the principles. But I was just curious. You said that the district is in where the financial center is, but it also has the crazy income inequality, because they'll have, and like from the times I've been in New York, they'll have like Section 8 housing right next to like the luxury apartments. Like it's very stark. Contrast. And I saw on your website you grew up right in that area, right? As well.
Yeah. I mean, so I'm so glad you like get it and kind of see that picture, because it's wild. Like I grew up on 59th Street, which was the border of Hell's Kitchen and the Upper West Side. And as you said, like you have New York City public housing, and then on the opposite side of the street, literally like luxury developments that are just like investment vehicles that just sit there vacant. And there are these, beautiful like glass like structures at like 100 stories high, but it is just such a visual depiction of what we've been talking about in terms of just like the winner take all and the polarization and just the extreme nature of like our system.
And the reason I bring that up specifically is because for me, I wonder how, like, whether someone loves Jerry Nadler, who's the current incumbent in that district, New York's 10th congressional, whether you love him, whether you hate him, I don't know. You said it's the financial center, and you need someone who is really up to date on cryptocurrency and data privacy and all the latest financial blah 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 blah. And I don't know if necessarily people who live in that district are going to find the solutions from someone who predates the time period that all this came up. So not only is it like the stark contrast within your district with the two people that are running to be the representative of it. I mean, you're like a 25-year-old out of Harvard, as you said, and I don't know if a 70-plus-year-old career politician is also the type of person who has the policies who can solve those important discrepancies with wealth inequality. And I think that's where the whole universal basic income and universal health care and all those various other policies come in that I think makes candidacies like yours very appealing and are really going to be the future.
Yeah, I mean, again, like that's part of the goal is like, I don't know what your goals and dreams are in particular, but like anyone watching this who even has an inkling, a sense of like, oh, like maybe I could run for something someday, like freaking do it because we're counting on you. Like there is nothing, inherently special about any of us, right? Like the most unlikely candidate of all was this random guy named Andrew Yang. And look how far he
Absolutely.
got. Look how he has driven and really accelerated us by decades, right? Like I mean, yeah. So that's a huge part of the goal is just getting a wave of Freedom Democrats because people will not change unless they have an incentive to. And that goes especially for these 20, 30-year incumbents who've never faced a primary challenge or a serious primary challenge in their entire career.
They'll get like someone who's able to muster up like 5%, but they've never actually like felt
the
someone
pressure
coming behind them, they're trailing their back or whatever. No, but I totally agree. What would your advice be? Because I mean, the Yang Gang skews so young, especially on these online platforms. If there was someone who was considering taking the leap that you took in running for Congress and challenging one of these incumbents, what would you suggest to them? Like, how would they get started?
Yeah. So in terms of the sort of nitty gritty, tangible next steps, I put together just a collection loosely in a tweet thread that we can share below, and it walks through literally because I had to figure this shit out from like Googling and making mistakes, but it's literally like opening up a campaign bank account, and guess what? Like half of the banks will not open it for you if you're not, steeped in the Democratic like politics. And then you file FEC Form 1 and Form 2, and you open an IRS number. A lot of it is digital now, if not most of it, and can be done literally from your laptop. But I kind of laid it out in terms of the links and next steps. And one of the things that we're going to work on in like hopefully the weeks to come is to have it even more streamlined and simpler. Because I get it, it's freaking confusing. It's by design, but it is totally not impossible. Like, especially us being more digital natives and digitally savvy, so much of this is just literally clicking buttons and boxes and forms online.
Yeah, I mean, I find it's like you hear all these like various like form numbers, and you need
it's just like.
But when you actually get down to it, you're like, oh, this is pretty simple. It just sounds complicated.
Yeah. I mean that is like you just put it so well. Like that is true of so many things, like especially in legalese, and it's by design, right? It's designed to make you feel like shut out and less than when we're not.
Yeah, exactly. We got to empower people from the ground on up. If there's anyone who's watching who has any questions as we're going along here, feel free to type them out. I want to get back to kind of more back towards when you first heard of Andrew Yang. When did you actually first hear like Andrew Yang, or when did you first hear about universal basic income? Like, was it Andrew Yang first, or did you already heard of UBI?
Gotcha. I think I had pretty loosely heard of it through the kind of tech world. I think like Zuckerberg had given a speech about it, and Musk had talked about it. So I had loose sort of understanding of it from primarily the tech angle. But I think the kind of full-fledged, like this is necessary, we must get this done now, was beginning with Andrew. And then, I mean, basically coming across his campaign in like February 2018, totally activated what was like kind of latent and back in the mind of like, oh, this is important. Automation, you see it everywhere you go, any workplace you go to. And it's like, okay, but so what do we actually do about it? And it's kind of this general malaise around like, oh, we don't have any solutions. We're kind of all fucked. And I think it was his campaign in early 2018 that just focused the eye on like, no, we do actually have a path forward.
Awesome. Yeah. You were early as heck. I'm trying to think, is there any like specific something specific besides what we've already talked about to your district, which someone wasn't sure? It's New York's 10th congressional district. running against Jerry Nadler. Is there any like issue that's very specific to that district that you'd be able to elaborate more on here?
Totally. And you also just made me remember that I was also pretty steeped in like the IDW, like intellectual dark web world in the years prior to Ying. And so like Sam Harris, like Eric Weinstein, Steven Pinker, like some of these people I had listened to for kind of like years up to the like Yang announcing. And I'd actually remembered like I think it was like later into 2018. I was like, I felt like we had these two like siloed worlds of like Eric and Brett were talking about, well, there's this like latent political movement of, you know, hundreds of thousands, millions who are just seeking something that's off the menu, that is like a voice of reason. And then there was like Andrew in the campaign, and like my whole urgency around like getting out there was to try to bridge the two. And because to me, it just seemed like the whole Sam Harris world was existing on its own in the realm of ideas. And then Andrew was the one like turning the ideas into action. And so that was for me like a big bridge to like heighten my awareness earlier on. But to your question, yes. So one of the differences about this district is demographically. So two particularly notable groups, I think, are one, it's one of the most Jewish districts in the country. So if you think of like the west side of Manhattan in particular, it also has Borough Park, which is like a massive Orthodox Jewish enclave in South Brooklyn. And it was kind of gerrymandered to cover these communities. But one of the sad realities is they are on the front lines of anti-Semitism and a huge spike in hate crimes. And literally, if you go in the communities there in South Brooklyn, like bricks, people being bricked in the head, and like businesses and like synagogues being marked and attacked. And they're just on the front lines of, so kind of what again seemed to me to exist in two silos, where there was all this commentary from people like Barry Weiss and Deborah Lipstadt and other historians on the rise in anti-Semitism and some of the root causes of institutional collapse.
Yeah, that's what I was actually just about to ask, what you thought the root causes were of.
Yeah. And so one of the like theses around this is you can map it out from the Black Plague to 9/11 to the financial crisis to now, whenever there's these big systemic failures and massive crises in society, from the far left to the far right, as human beings, we are narrative seeking, and we need an answer. And that answer has just consistently and historically been the Jew. And so there was all this commentary and just like really interesting diagnosis. And then again, there was the Andrew Yang campaign of like, here are solutions, here's how we move forward as a society without pointing fingers at other humans. That's what's so radical about his populism, is that it doesn't require you to hate anyone or to scapegoat anyone for your plight. And so that is very much like top of mind in the 10th district. And one of my hopes over the coming weeks and months is to help bridge that connection, right? To say, like, the diagnosis is apt. Like, this is a crisis. But in 2020, education and condemnation will not suffice. Like, the structural forces underpinning what we see as bubbling up in manifestations of hate, and in some instances, like, it is not enough to call it out, or educate people on its existence. Like, we have to solve the underlying root problems of the institutions collapsing and the system not working for more and more people. So that's like a huge area that I think, unfortunately, that bridge has not been made, and but I really hope to make it, because I think it's so central, and this goes for all forms of hate and bigotry generally.
Yeah, I think that's what a lot of people appreciated about Andrew's campaign is I've talked about this before. Um, it seems like a lot of politicians and people who run for office, they're always trying to solve the effects
Surface
of
level. Yep.
the problems instead of actually solving the problems that cause the effects. And
Exactly.
that's why nothing ever changes.
Yep.
And I think for things like anti-Semitism and racism or whatever ism it is, there's people who like generally there's like some people that like genuinely have like hate in their heart, and but there's a reason why that they fell down that bad or incorrect form of thinking. And like I don't think as a society like we should just castigate everyone uh who says or does something bad. There's got to be like a way to bring these people back out of I mean, it's like a really complex thing to try to think about and try to solve for, but nobody has in it for a long time, and I feel like uh it's time to start.
Yeah, and I think this is also true kind of across the board in terms of like the particularities of this district. Like the median age is, so you can kind of picture, it's like 35. Median income is like over 90,000. It's extremely disproportionately educated, with most people having at least a college education. And like working in some sort of professional services. Again, that's the like median, but again, that totally misses literally 1 in 6 people living below the federal poverty line, and working in the predominantly service industries. But I think one other area outside of like tackling hate is also just literally, and we're seeing this now, like this loneliness epidemic, where again, people predominantly like young professionals in 20s and 30s, and they're working in consulting firms and investment banks and law firms and all these kind of professional offices, and they're dead miserable.
Yeah.
And I think one of the benefits of like the freedom dividend of UBI and of restructuring a system that just fundamentally can work for everyone is it's not just empowering if you're on like the lower socioeconomic scale. I think it's empowering and increases the agency of everyone. And this goes especially for these like middle level management jobs, which, you might call bullshit jobs in many cases, but like to free people up to, first of all, do things they love and care about, and then make themselves, happier and more integrated in their community, but also then create new enterprise, new business that would add value. Like there's just so much untapped potential and like possibility for things that people can create that they're not doing because they're trapped in this cycle of chasing the next promotion, and like
Yeah.
paying and just climbing that ladder, which it's tragic, but it doesn't give them any fulfillment either. So
People
yeah,
need
so
purpose in their lives to
yeah,
be happy. And it's hard to get that in like a office building, even if it has like really nice windows on the outside.
yeah,
In
and
New
so
York.
people have that like that latent implicit sense of like unease and like malaise and just like but they just can't even fathom an alternative. Like what is an alternative to like wage labor? Like what is an alternative to spending 14 hours a day turning capital into more capital? And so I think that's just like the lifting of the human spirit. I know this sounds like very like fluffy and whatever, but I think it's like on us to convey like how powerful these ideas are beyond just surviving.
Yeah. I mean, to kind of answer that question, I mean, as more and more, the whole idea behind Andrew's UBI, which, I mean, I think even if the whole technological transformation of the economy wasn't happening, we should still have UBI
Exactly.
because it's still such a good idea. But
Exactly.
UBI is only going to, I mean, not UBI. automation and artificial intelligence, that's only going to accelerate all of these problems that have contributed to why we need UBI in the first place with the, economic income volatility. And like one thing that I found really interesting is just the fact that because of this whole coronavirus thing, and people, because restaurants are closing and bars are closing and they're losing their tips and their wages, the risk of heart attack and like stress related sudden strokes and stuff like that, it goes up exponentially in times like this. And it's like a whole nother reason why, if everyone just had an extra $1,000 a month, and obviously everyone who's watching this knows, if that's a family of 3 adults, it's $3,000 extra dollars a month income into the household each month. It's not insignificant. So, someone asked Patrick in the chat. He was saying, "Is there anyone else that's running besides you and Jerry Nadler for the Democratic nomination?"
Yes. So basically, most every seat now has like a Bernie type challenger, and so there's one for this seat as well. We will see at the end of this week who actually ends up on the ballot after the filing period.
Deadline,
yeah. But again, like that was part of the goal. Is every incumbent, every district now feels like they have to respond to like Bernie's talking points because they have a challenger who is pushing it at them and attacking them for not addressing them. And so yes, basically most every district now has like a Justice Democrat or brand new Congress Bernie type challenger.
Yeah, that does seem pretty common, and that's what we need to be doing. Forward, and literally every single district.
Yeah,
and then we'll have the next AOC, except it'll be full UBI instead of Trojan horse UBI. that was a joke. I'm not. Thank you AOC for coming out for UBI today. But I'm what was I gonna ask? I forgot what I was gonna ask because I started making my AOC jokes. What was it? Yeah, it was a good question. I forgot about it. Someone said, "I'm in hospitality. I'm worried for extra staff. I'm in management." Yeah. What else? What if what do you think that the government can do besides? Oh, I know what I was going to ask you about now. Okay, I was going to ask, what was your whole opinion on Andrew endorsing Biden over Bernie? Kind of put you on the spot.
Yeah, it's a tough one. I generally try to get the benefit of the doubt and just I think he has sound reasoning behind his decisions. It did seem like a bit early, but I mean the debate last night was just so bad that I don't know. I'm just trying to move forward from both of them because it was just so embarrassing. It was really so embarrassing. But I can understand where Andrew came from and having the sense of, well, we need to move forward. And I guess he had some degree of, I don't know, confidence that Joe understood the fourth industrial revolution and gave it more credibility than Bernie did. If that ends up being the case, I hope so, right? Like you can only wish that continues to be true, and it isn't just like him pandering to us. So yeah, I mean, I'm hopeful. I hope that but to be determined.
Yeah, I mean, I tend to agree because I personally was expecting him to wait till after the convention or at least after voting was done. So I was kind of surprised when he just was there on CNN and just came out and he's like, they're like, "Andrew, what do you think of the race?" And he's like, "Well, I think Joe Biden's going to be the nominee, so I endorse him right now." That surprised me, but then all the backlash has been against Andrew specifically. I think people got to look back and think about he's always said he would endorse the nominee, and he's the mad guy. And if you do look at the numbers and the states that are coming up, it doesn't look too rosy for Bernie. But specifically, the reason I asked this in the terms of your campaign is what do you think is the distinction between someone who's running on like the Humanity First platform and someone who's running on kind of like the Bernie platform, because I think a lot of people do try to put Yang supporters and Bernie supporters, whether it's like people in the media or people who are in the Sanders movement. I think they try to box us in the same group, where I think both Bernie supporters and Andrew Yang supporters have very, very similar goals. But what I think makes them different is I think they have very different approaches to how they get there. And I'm wondering what your opinion is on how that distinction's made.
I think I would say there are at least three differences the way I think about it. One is I think we fight for deep freedom, not shallow equality. I would say two
What
is
do you mean by
yeah.
that?
So this is like this is a phrase I take from Roberto Unger, who's like a legal philosopher, and deep freedom is what he calls empowerment of agency, empowerment of the bigness of life. Shallow equality is like the pigs are still feeding at the trough, and then we're gonna say like, I don't know, let's diversify the trough, but like it's still this like fixed little pie. Or we say we need equality of outcome, right? Or like we have to. I think it's tied into the second idea of fighting for raising the floor as opposed to lowering the ceiling, right? So if you're fighting for shallow equality, then you might say, well, let's eradicate millionaires and billionaires. Let's eradicate, entrepreneurs and kind of put a ceiling on net like wealth that's derived from like network effects, which is only accelerating, as opposed to saying, well, let's just invest in people directly with a universal basic income.
Yeah.
And so I think deep freedom means like really actually believing that all people like have within themselves the right and the will and the way to like not let the past define the future and just become fuller selves. And it's all very, abstract, but I think the way it translates in the policies, the clearest way is like a federal jobs guarantee versus UBI. And I think the differences are very stark. Do you tie someone's hands and tie their resources to working in a prescribed set of roles, and saying, well, you're going to get an hourly wage? Or do you free them up to say, well, you can work for yourself, or you can start your own enterprise, or be more mobile? I think one of the things I learned from Unger, and I think his theory kind of drives a lot of Yangism and the Yang Gang is, wage labor actually wasn't the dominant model of survival, even in the American context. Like in the late 19th century, like in our agrarian economy, we actually had self-sufficient like farmers. And the idea of tying someone's survival and subsistence to someone else's wages was seen as like adjacent to slavery.
Yeah.
And again, like we have been steeped in this model for over a century now. But I think that core of a universal basic income versus conditional or wage labor really captures the essence of deep freedom versus shallow equality, as well as raising the floor as opposed to lowering the ceiling. And I think one other main distinction is, do you blame the people or do you blame the system? And one example is like, do you point fingers at the billionaires, or do you point fingers, let's say, at trillion-dollar firms that are a result of a set of incentives and economic systems? And even though this might seem like a small difference, it has huge implications for, I mean, if you look at like the generosity and kindness and heart that you see in the Yang Gang, and people are shocked that like when we're in their comments and their Twitter feed, we're not, our first instinct isn't to go for the jugular, go for the ad hominem.
Try to build a bridge.
Yeah, and that's I mean, that's huge. That is everything, really. Like that's how we have a functioning society and trust in systems. Um, so I think those are three big differences um, that I hope more groups and movements would adopt and make their own.
Yeah, I mean, I think it's what makes this one unique, and hopefully, we don't need to have any new groups coming soon because the Yang Gang gets so big. But
Yes.
no, I totally agree with what you said. Like, when I hear like, oh, we need to get rid of billionaires and millionaires, I'm like, why are we focused on bringing like a certain, whether you are mad about the 1%? I think everyone has a right to be mad about the, like, I agree with Bernie Sanders when he says like this income inequality issue is just crazy. But like, I think the focus has to be on how to bring everyone up rather than trying to put blame on a certain group of people, and like it just causes more division. And I mean, that's another one of the huge problems in our country right now is we're so divided across so many political and ideological and unfortunately even racial lines. And I think we just we gotta find policies and ideas that bring people together. So I really enjoyed listening to your explanation of the quote. It was interesting. Um, what who do you think is like the predominant uh type of like voter in your district? Do you think your district leans more like kind of like, let's say, the New York election was today, and in your district it was Bernie versus Sanders. Where do you think that would go?
It would definitely go to Biden in New York. So there's a unfortunate difference, big difference between like what is the population of a district and what is the voting block. Um, so there's 750,000 people who live in one of the most densely populated area, like the island of Manhattan, the west side of Manhattan. Um, Only 4% of people vote in the primary, in the June primary. So that's 30,000 people.
Wow.
So yeah, it's wild. And this was true. So there's actually interesting parallels. Like if you look at Alexandria's race in 2018 and New York 14, like the way that the districts are cut, they're all similarly sized. So it's like 720 to 750,000 people. And we all have these ridiculous June primaries. So the presidential election in New York is April 28th, and then the congressional and state are June 23rd. So like no one votes in them.
Why do they do that? Do you know why they split it up in some states? To me, it doesn't seem to make sense in terms of getting out the vote, but
Yeah, I mean, the cynical interpretation is like it's by design, and
yeah, that's what almost seems that way.
yeah, I mean, right? There's a certain, as Andrews put it, it's like certain institutions have certain incentives, and a lot of times those incentives don't involve more or new or different types of people getting out to vote. Um, in some ways, it's just easier to kind of keep your block, keep it little contained, and have them coming as regular voters.
Hmm. Yeah, I didn't mean to interrupt you though. What were you saying before? I was wondering what you thought of that.
Um,
It was about the you were just talking about how the June 4th and
June 20th. Yeah. So, okay, let's see. I'm going to lose it. Yes. So 750,000 people live here, 4% vote. So if we get 15,000 votes, just 2% of the entire population in the west side of Manhattan and South Brooklyn, then we have won the seat because of this thing called the Cook's Partisan Index, which is just a fancy way of saying like what percentage of the vote will go safely Democratic or safely Republican. So we are D plus 26, which means basically whoever wins, whoever gets that 15,001 votes on June 23rd has won the congressional seat.
yeah, there's
Because
not
80,
there's not going to be the general isn't in your district isn't gonna. That's not what decides who gets the seat. It's the primary.
exactly. And then so I think to your question of like, well, who actually shows up, like who's showing up to vote? We know it tends to be older people who have the time and have voted before. and they have to be registered Democrats as well because it's a closed primary.
Mm-hmm.
But even among those who are registered Democrats and could vote on that day, it's such a tiny, tiny fraction. And that's one of the things. If we take the Yang Gang plus, like the Yang Gang as the voting bloc core, and then add to that, then we can definitely get 2% of the entirety of New York's 10th district population.
Yeah, I mean, there's got to be at least. I mean, New York is Yang Gang central, besides like California, so gotta find those votes and then expand on them. Sigmoid asks, he wants to know why does UBI have to be universal? He asked, wouldn't it make more sense to have people making over 100K a year not get it because it wouldn't do much proportionally and saves costs? I know I have my opinion on this, but I'm curious to hear yours since you're the candidates.
Yeah, I mean, I think there are a lot of reasons why universalizing programs is the best way to go. One of them is that in terms of how we finance this, which is mainly through a value added tax, we're able to get so much more revenue if we have a flat consumption tax across the board. So right now we're just leaving so much revenue on the table, and by applying it universally across the board, we're able to get more in and then get more out and actually provide more to people. So it ends up giving most to those who have the least. And universalizing it, destigmatizes it. And I mean, the example always goes to the petroleum dividend in Alaska, where it goes to everyone, even in a Republican state, and it still ends up being very popular. But I think the most compelling case is just in terms of the social good, which is if you take an example of like Social Security and Medicare versus Medicaid, right? When we universalize programs across even a certain group, then those programs become sticky and they stay with us for a long, long time. They can't be touched. Versus when we make it conditional, the benefits are much lower. And it also has a multiplying effect. So it's not just what goes into each individual's hands, but it's like what the effect that has in a community, in a town, in a city, when you have a multiplying effect of spending and investment. So in many ways, the whole is bigger than the sum of its parts when we all get it versus just some of us.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I agree with all those reasons, and two more that I can think of off the top of my head is if you have like an income cap, and it's kind of like the issue with current means tested programs. Well, even if it's 100,000, people will get to 99K, and then it's like it's incentivizes people to stay down. It's a little different, I guess, at the higher income levels, but I think even more importantly is everyone in terms of the virus outbreak is everyone's like who have suddenly come out to push UBI, all these new people, they're like, we need this to happen and we need it to happen now. But if you means test it, suddenly you got to look at the whole population of every single adult over 18 who's eligible and find out how much they're making, and then it incentivizes people to like try to dodge, and it just it makes everything complicated, and it gets rid of the whole simplicity and kind of like one size fits all solution that fits so many
and that complexity is really costly, right? Both in terms of really like administering and monitoring and making sure you're poor enough to get it, but then also in terms of the time, as you said, like you can literally write checks to everyone, or you can start assessing like, tax returns and income and all sorts of other assets to like make sure you're targeting it to the right people who, as you said, are, might be, crossing state lines or kind of misreporting, or again, doing all the rational things anyone does to based on the incentives you give them structured in a program. So yeah, I think those are great reasons as well.
Mm-hmm. We're coming down to like we have we said we were going to go for an hour, so we have about 10 minutes left. If there's anyone who's just coming in here or has any questions, feel free to ask. Um, what was I gonna ask? There was something on your website. If I just pull it up, I was gonna ask about oh yeah, what is your on your website? You say student loan relief, and I was curious about the distinction because I know there's some policies like Andrew Yang's where he was going to try to get rid of a portion of student debt, and then there's others that go further, which is kind of the Bernie Sanders idea of let's eliminate all student debt. Where do you fall on that question?
I think I definitely agree more with the Yang approach, which is, for example, the like 10 by 10, like committing 10% for 10 years and then being debt free. I think I agree with that approach more in the sense that like only, 1 in 3 people are actually even attending college. And then within that, an even smaller fraction are attending um, a private university. And so I think our investment should be, we should be spending more on public education and community college, and having um, having less of a focus on like subsidizing basically like elite private education, which ends up being the most expensive bill. Um, but I certainly, yeah, I mean, I think that is a better approach, and our resources are better spent on again, like college is not the answer. Like the institutions, throwing money at institutions will not be what saves us, what gets us out of this moment. Um, it's going to be investing resources directly in people themselves.
Hmm. Yeah, I tend to agree. Well, I totally agree with the whole. We need to get off the whole. Everyone has to go to college to be successful, and if you don't go to college, you're not going to be successful. Because I think that's what drives young kids who aren't really sure of like what kind of decisions they're making when they're 17, 18 years old, and they sign that piece of paper, and suddenly they owe, you know, some entity $30,000 worth interest rates on top of that. Um, Someone brought up how where was it? They said because I'm an independent, I can't vote because, and I don't want to put myself to one of these sides because I think, for many people, like they think both of the party establishments stink. Um, and then the whole, the presidential primary is on one date, and then they do the other ones, and people will suddenly have less incentive to go out because they're like, well, I don't know any of these people. uh, and it's not at the top of their priority list. What do you think we can do besides democracy dollars and some of like the other ideas like ranked choice voting to try to really make our democracy a democracy where we try to have as much like outside influence from money and lobbyists as possible, but to where we're also maximizing the voice of the people and having as many people as can possible vote. Like I don't know, I just I don't understand why there's closed primaries. Like I kind of get it because you don't want people like sabot, but I feel like independents should be able to pick a side. It doesn't make sense to me. But what are your thoughts?
Yeah, I mean, I think like we need automatic voter registration. We need to be able to vote by mail. It should be a national holiday. We need ranked choice voting. We need public financing of elections. I mean, this is like really at the core of so much, right? Because you can trace basically like um, private financing and then choices in legislation that doesn't reflect even what a majority and of the American people believe. And you can pick your issue, whether that's climate change or gun reform or healthcare. Like there is just a one-to-one correlation between what ends up getting voted on and supported and passed, and which particular groups or voices were most represented through campaign finance. Um, so it's just such a shitty way to like try to win an election or skew a perspective by just quashing like who goes out to vote. Um, and yeah, I think like that democracy reform package like has to be an absolute priority.
Yeah, that's crazy to me how it feels like just no new laws or any like needed change has happened in 10, 20 years. And like, I'm so young, you're older than me, but still pretty young in the grand scheme of things. Like, I don't know, is this like how it always goes? It's like all these ideas that we need to get into office. And I guess uh I was gonna ask, like, what is, I think, in like as quick as you can, like maybe like a 1 or 2 minutes, what's like the biggest distinction between you and Jerry Nadler?
Oh, sure. So I think there were like two questions in there. I'll
Yeah, yeah.
tackle the
Take as much
latter
time
first.
as you need.
Totally. So on the latter, like, and as you said earlier, like I said this, to any of the reporters' interviews early on, which is like, oh, why are you taking on Jerry? Why are you taking on Jerry? I was like, this is my home. There is nowhere else I could possibly do this, and it's not about him. Like, great guy, patriot, public servant, been doing this for decades. Fantastic. It's about our vision. And that vision is clearly laid out. Like we have that blueprint. If Jerry, were to champion and say as a first
UBI
legislative priority,
tomorrow.
what's that?
If he were to come out for UBI tomorrow
Yeah,
and
if
all
he
these
was,
other ideas.
if he says like I'm drafting the freedom dividend as we speak, and a data bill of rights, and democracy dollars, public financing of elections, and so on, like awesome, great, Jerry, you do it, right? But it's like
Yeah.
until that happens, and again, nothing changes unless they have an incentive to change. So like that's just been the consistent message. Like it's not about him. I'm doing this here because this is home. There's nowhere else I could possibly do this and win. And it's about us. It's about our vision for like a system that works.
Mm-hmm.
To your other question, it was actually really interesting, which was kind of like, why are things so slow? Like why haven't we seen like structural change and whatnot? In many ways, this is actually institutional design in action. Like
Yeah.
the separation of powers and like the constitutional structure of our government is designed to be conservative in its pace, in the pace of change, because of checks and balances and the distribution of power and the fear of authoritarianism. So this is like conservative institutional design, and I think that's in part is what's so powerful about the Yang Gang and about what fighting for deep freedom as opposed to shallow equality is we, like, our vision and our fight is not predicated on the existing institutional order. It's not saying like we want equality within the backdrop of like the set of institutions we have. It's in many ways saying we need to build new institutions and new systems. And I think that to me is one of the most powerful things about what we're doing is like the freedom dividend, like UBI, even on its own, will like can help accelerate and empower people to activate and to make that change possible by building new systems, by building new institutions and alternatives to what exists. Because you're 100% right. Like it is slow by design.
Yeah. 100%. To me, it's like it's just like I'm so tired of DC politics and the politicization of like things like coronavirus, and I'm just so over it, which is why I'm very happy that there's a lot of new people with new ideas that are running for office like yourself. So you are in New York's 10th congressional district, for anyone who doesn't know. I just posted your Twitter in the chat. And where else can people find out information about you? Where can people go and find your Fox News interview? That's what
Totally.
I was impressed with.
Oh, thanks, man. Sure. So Herzog2020.com, Herzog 2020. You can go to the press link there, or you can just Google if you want, like Jonathan Herzog, Fox News. Yeah, I mean, there's Twitter. I mean, all sorts, like Instagram. What else is there? Facebook. It's all kind of it's all kind of building, because right now we're transitioning now that we're on the ballot, which is a huge freaking deal.
Yeah,
And
man.
campaigning and canvassing is kind of shut down. We're like building this whole digital like canvassing and campaigning arena. And so if anyone, like,
Interesting.
Yang Yang has so much talent like across the country, and now that we're being forced to work remotely, this is like a crisis, and it's terrible in so many ways, but we can like fight to actually make this change possible, like from within our own self quarantines. And that's kind of one of our strengths in many ways. So yeah, it's Herzog2020.com to sign up to volunteer, to chip in, to watch any of those the videos or interviews.
Yeah. Can people volunteer online? Because with the whole, no large gatherings, you got to stay in your house. How are people able to help? Can people still volunteer and help digitally?
Totally. So we are. So it's like a full pivot, because we were literally out in the streets like 14 hours a day, just getting
Yeah.
signatures, because getting on the ballot itself is just. I mean, speaking
slog.
of like barriers to the democratic process, but it is going to be 100% only digital, right? So that means calling and texting people. That means social media and Reddit and Facebook and Twitch and Twitter and all of the above. Um, it's like brand new territory, but in so many ways, like so ripe for us and our community to get this shit done, because we can organize and make impact online like no other. So it is all happening online for the next 2 months.
Heck yeah. Someone asked if New York has primary voting by mail.
That is a great question. I know they had it at some point. I know the governor added it for like a Queen special election. I am not 100% sure about what the status will be for the June primary.
All right, Crystal. So you got to Jonathan's got to follow up on that for you, and you got to DM him on Twitter. He'll get back to you. Good community service. I'm just messing around. Might be busy. I don't know. Maybe I'm forgetting. But yeah, man. I appreciate you coming on and having the conversation. I enjoyed it a lot. When is voting day for all of those who live in New York 10th congressional district? Hopefully, there's a few of you.
It's June 23rd, and there is early voting for people who are registered. Those details are to come, but it is June 23rd. We can freaking do this. Like, Yang Yang can win, and win big across the board. Like, we're not here to have a conversation, to share some cool futuristic ideas. We are here to get them done. And that's what this is about. And I'm so grateful to you guys, because, speaking of like filling in the gap and just like building from scratch, like, you freaking like moved to Iowa as well, right? And
almost, yeah, like a month.
Just like brought us all along with you. So can't thank you enough for it.
Yeah, real pleasure.
And also, by the way, it freaking revolutionized like campaign fundraising itself. Like, well, anyway,
I appreciate that. Yeah, it was a real pleasure having you on, guys. Look him up, Herzog2020.com. Follow him on Twitter, Jonathan Herzog. And even though everyone here, I'm sure, is already subscribed because they love this channel so much, make sure you subscribe, like the video, share it with all your friends, and we are out of here.
Thanks, guys.